Welcome to Counterpoint. I'm Tanya Granick-Allen. When I think back on the past 2 years of COVID and all that we as a society have been through, one promise I made to myself is that I will never, ever take my liberty for granted again. So many freedoms at various times in the past 2 years have been infringed upon, temporarily suspended, and even violated. And I suspect many of you feel the same way. Liberties such as when and how we could go to church and worship, if and how we could travel, how we could shop, if and how we could access restaurants, how children go to school, if they were even attending in person. It all has been a lot to navigate, especially if you didn't participate in the mandates. The masking, the capacity restrictions, the vaccine mandates, and of course, the vaccine passports. All of this made so many of us look back longingly on the days pre-COVID and left us wondering if we would ever get back to that time again. Well, one organization which sprung up during COVID to stand up against the violations of our freedoms, especially when it came to religious liberty, is Liberty Coalition Canada. They have launched several initiatives aimed at supporting Canadians through infringements on liberty within Canada. Later in the program, we will be joined by Liberty Coalition lawyer James Kitchen, who will walk us through some of the more legal concerns and challenges to our liberty. But right now, I'd like to welcome Michael Thiessen, pastor, author, and founder of Liberty Coalition Canada. Michael, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm looking forward to this discussion, that's for sure.
I am too, Tanya. Thanks for having me on.
So why was the LCC founded, the Liberty Coalition Canada? I recall in the very early days of COVID, there was a lot of infringement on religious liberties. And I think that sort of seemed kind of when Liberty Coalition Canada sprung up. So share with us.
Yeah, so basically, in January 2021, so now that's almost 9 months into responding to the pandemic, a number of us pastors had already been active and already been working together, but we formed the coalition in order to continue to inform people in a more unified voice, all the things that we have been saying from day one. It's not the government's responsibility to tell me how I ought to worship God or where I ought to worship God. Day one, we were out there concerned about, all of the things that you just mentioned, freedom of conscience, informed consent, all of these things that many of us who have participated alongside of the medical community as recipients of our healthcare, we're sitting there going, wait a minute, we're ignoring all of the rules of engagement for how long we can remember. And then also, we had pastors being fined all across the country. We had pastors in Alberta being jailed. We had pastors in Ontario being fined. You name any province that we're connected with people right across the country. And so we formed together to say, hey, can we work together a little bit in a more coordinated fashion?
So is your organization primarily Christian, or is it anybody of any faith can join, or any organization have joined this coalition?
We think of ourselves as serving many people for the sake of religious rights, but we are a distinctly Christian organization. All of our worldview analysis, all of our commentary, all of our initiatives come from a Christian perspective and a Christian worldview. So we've certainly been able to help many different people in many different professions, and all of those people don't profess to know Christ. We're here to serve the community and to serve the nation, but we're coming at it from a distinctly Christian perspective.
And I guess if you look back in the last couple of years, when we read a headline of some religious leader being jailed or some pastor, I mean, it was primarily Christian pastors who were being jailed and fined and having their churches shut down, et cetera.
Yeah, there's a number of reasons for that, I think, here in Canada. I think the number one reason for that is this convergence of boldness going in the face of, the government organization. And some of that boldness is coming from individuals who have grown up, known Canada enough to be comfortable to speak against our government. And so I think there were a number of different faith communities that were equally upset with what was going on, but maybe didn't have that bold comfort level to say, you know what, I've lived here long enough to know that you're just messing with me and you're messing with the Constitution. And
okay, I'm going to pause you there. We've got to cut to commercial break, but we'll be right back. Welcome back. We're continuing our discussion with the founder of Liberty Coalition Canada, Michael Thiessen. Michael, please pick up where you left off just before break.
Yeah, what I was going to say is that we had the privilege early on, a number of us pastors, a number of us individuals who were inquiring, probably similar to yourself, Tanya, to receive legal counsel. So the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom, we asked them to come in and inform us on what was going on. And we had the privilege, we're going to talk to James later on. We had the privilege of meeting him and just learning from him all of the constitutional violations. That happened way back in June 2020.
Right.
So many of us were facing real odds locally, as we all were, family, church, occupation, everything. But we received legal counsel and were just flabbergasted by the level of violations going on against Canadians right from day one of the pandemic.
So what did you, and yes, we will speak with your chief litigator, but what did you see as some of the more egregious violations during COVID?
Well, the first thing that we learned about was just how the government was ignoring freedom of information inquiries. So when the Constitution puts its limitations on our human rights, there has to be demonstrable evidence. So immediately the Constitutional Center, the JCCF, started asking for, let's see your evidence. Like that's public information. If you are restricting our rights, let's see your evidence. And we heard very early on.
Prove to me that you need to lock us down. Prove to me that we need to do this violation of our rights in order to, for what? They have to prove it, correct?
Right. The onus is on the government. It's not on us to prove that we need to be free people.
Yes, exactly.
And so the government was just ignoring these freedom of information inquiries all along. The second thing that I became really aware of really quick, and we're going to talk about the churches, but I have a son who's a cancer survivor. I have a daughter who has a spina bifida. We've been journeying with the medical community for years. And immediately, places like Sick Kids writing an article one week that says kids don't need to wear masks. And then About Facing just weeks later, now requiring our children who are going to the hospital to wear masks. That is that is alarming. Wow. You do not have reviewed peered studies changing their minds in 3 weeks or whenever the turnaround was. So it was these things that we started seeing in the medical community, these real inconsistencies. And then, of course, the locking down of the churches. Tanya, I know you're a Catholic believer in the Lord Jesus Christ, and I'm a Reformed Baptist guy. We believe in the resurrection of the dead. So if the world's worst plague is upon us, the church wants to be free to go out and give people the real hope of the resurrection. And it was like everybody I knew was forgetting that was the task of the church in times of real trouble.
And at the end of the day, it didn't really matter what I believed. There are enshrined rights for religious freedoms in our charter. So a government cannot just willy-nilly suspend them. As you said, there has to be demonstrable proof that there's something afoot that it needs to be suspended.
Yeah, absolutely. And so those rights are in our Constitution. We're thankful for those fundamental freedoms, and they were ignored from day one. And that was a real concern for me, specifically because I want our church to be a refuge to the community, and I want my voice to be a voice that proclaims the Lord Jesus. And in a time of real fear, freedom is essential for you to be able to minister to other people. We had great organizations observing that not only the limits of going to church on Sunday was limiting and harmful for people. But when you stop allowing people to visit seniors in these communities, you're basically imprisoning them. And when you're stopping people from going and loving their neighbor by actively bringing them food or checking up on them, and you're deceiving them to be so scared of one another, these things are just obvious problems that if you've got your eyes to see and your ears to hear, it's pretty clear.
Okay, we're going to bring in James just after the commercial break. We have about 15 seconds really quickly. So how big's your organization now?
The organization is nationwide. We've got a tremendous amount of support. Our podcast gets a number of few thousand views every time we go on, and we try to share our concerns. And about 200 churches, 300 churches.
Wow. Okay, we're going to pick up this discussion in just a few moments. Welcome back. We're still unpacking everything that happened in COVID and sort of still is happening. And joining me today is Michael Thiessen, who's the founder of Liberty Coalition Canada and the chief litigator with Liberty Coalition Canada, James Kitchen. So, Michael, before in the first couple segments before James joins us, which is now, we were discussing some of the more egregious violations of our liberties, because there were many. And I remember one really stood out. And maybe, like, I have a soft heart for young people, especially those who are trying to navigate their way. But the university and college students, where these mandates kept changing, and some of them were simply denied access to their school or denied to continue their education because they didn't get the jab. Why was that an important issue to take up, Michael?
Yeah, so the vaccine mandates came upon us all at once. And so you had the professionals and you had the students and you had churches, you had everybody trying to grapple with what are we going to do here? And the students, of course, you're right, it hit them first because they were all preparing to go back to school. We had all of our politicians, from our prime minister to our premiers, all saying we would never, ever, ever do a vaccine mandate. That would be divisive. And then within 3 weeks, all of them changing their minds. So the way we responded in two ways. And this is really where our partnership with James solidified. We responded with a theological and philosophical letter to say why a Christian might have a conscience issue with being vaccinated. And we tried to establish, and that again, that's because we were promised that people were going to have exemptions.
Right.
That if you formulated your thoughts, if you went through a form, that you would be exempt from these mandates. So we put that together. We had about 27 pastors sign it almost immediately after reviewing it. And it was signed by 16,000 Christians within 3 days.
Like university students and college students.
Like university students, college students, parents,
wow,
professionals, anyone who said, we want freedom for our medical choices. And then James came along and wonderfully wrote a legal letter that was to accompany that declaration for freedom against medical coercion, whereby the school would be able to go, oh, they've got their exemption form and their theology down. And now they have a lawyer attached right to that form saying, be very careful, university, accept this exemption. Or James, you can go on about how you worded it. So that's how we really dove into that. And James has helped lead a number of cases now in order to respond to that.
So James, let me ask you then, did this letter work?
Not really. A lot of places really just did whatever they wanted to. And that didn't really surprise me. You're only going to not do something that you want to do if it's unlawful, if you think you will get caught, if you think you have to pay the price. And that's the problem we've had lately, right? The courts haven't wanted to hold these people accountable, and neither have the human rights commissions. So even though prior to COVID, this stuff would have been blatantly unlawful, most people would have been quite scared to do it. They would have felt like we're going to be held accountable. They had this sense that they're not going to be held accountable now. And, the actions of the commissions and the courts and the tribunals have indicated to hold them accountable, and that they're actually going to change the law to accommodate COVID rather than keeping the law and, upholding rights, notwithstanding COVID. So, plus you had the problem of everybody doing it all at once and the law not being able to catch up. right? I use the analogy of if you have 100 people looting a store and you have 10 police officers, they're probably not going to do anything because they physically can't. They can't keep up. They can't manage it. There's too many people breaking the law all at once.
Right.
So what you had was dozens of universities, scores of companies, and tens of thousands of people impacted all at once. All at once, they were being treated unlawfully. Everybody was acting unlawfully together. It's like they were all looting the store at the same time. And so the law can't keep up. So they can effectively get away with it, right? And then after the fact, they have a decent chance of being able to have the law accommodate them instead of the other way around. So I did have, bright spots, right? There were some students that were accommodated. There were some universities that backed down. So there was some success, but it was very limited. And that is rather bizarre if you're not, used to seeing these types of things, because you think, okay,
Right.
This is a first nation. We have the rule of law. We have rights. They're written down. We have a heritage of this. So for me, it wasn't that surprising. I'm rather cynical, but I think for the outside observer, it was pretty jarring to see this because it just didn't make any sense with what we thought this nation was all about.
Well, and I was an outside observer, and my phone was ringing all off the hook with so many students contacting me, because I, obviously did some political things before, saying, do you have a lawyer I can use? I really need to start class. I want to go to class. Do you have a lawyer? I'm thinking, what world do we live in which you need to obtain a lawyer to access your university classroom? Anyhow, we're going to continue this in just a few moments. Welcome back. We have James Kitchen and Michael Thiessen, both from the Liberty Coalition Canada. Thank you again, gentlemen. There's so much to discuss, such little time. So let's see what we can unpack. We talk about religious accommodation, and I can say that as a recent university student, not to date myself, but I went to university a while ago. But I never used to have to get a religious accommodation letter for vaccines to attend school. If I had them, I never had to furnish evidence. This is a new thing. Is this going to be the new normal, James, for workplaces to demand disclosure of your health status? And if you don't, will religious accommodations continually be trampled on? Are they being upheld? What's going on there?
I think it will become the new normal, unless those with the authority to do something about it decide to do something about it. That's what it'll really come down to. We're going to have, I think, the next year or two of a lot of litigation, both at the human rights tribunals and at the courts and at the disciplinary tribunals that manage professionals. All these hearings are ongoing. A lot of them are just starting. I'm not the only one doing this. There's a number of other lawyers doing it. I think over the next 2 years, you're going to see whether or not the people with authority in these positions that make decisions, they're going to decide that. They're going to decide the law for the country. That's kind of how it works in our system, for better or for worse. And it's going to be up to them, right? I mean, to me, it's obvious. Whether we're talking about what the law was prior to COVID, whether we're talking about human decency, whether we're talking about science and facts about how, this stuff doesn't work, whatever we're talking about, to me, the answer is obvious. But to these people in these positions, for the most part, they are, for lack of a better word, they're woke. And the woke thing to do is to uphold these restrictions, uphold these conditions, uphold this segregation and this discrimination, and to defer to the so-called experts, whoever they may be, and to just let everybody get away with it. That's been the woke thing to do so far. And if that continues, then yes, this is going to become the new norm. And whether it's this vaccine or a different one, and whatever Christian issue it is, where Christians don't want to go along with the tyranny of society, you're gonna see this segregation and discrimination and second class citizen stuff continue in the workplace and in the universities.
So we as a society have become so progressive that now we are actually regressive. That's what I read from your statement there.
Yes,
it's astounding. Michael, are you surprised that we've come this far? I like to be hopeful and have optimism. Do you foresee things changing in the near future?
You may not want to have asked me that question if we want to remain hopeful, Tanya. I'm with James. I'm only hopeful if there is a revival in this country of individuals. James and I have been talking about this from day one. It is the citizens of this country that are responsible for the outcomes of this country. And so far, it is not a hopeful scenario. Many Canadians are proving themselves to be socialists or willing to go along with a socialist agenda just to, get along, just put up to get along. The hope would come if the citizenry were to awaken and say to itself, no, our current worldview, our current choices, our current desire to have all things handed to us on a platter in return for our freedom is not a good scenario. And so
now, didn't the Freedom Convoy, didn't those truckers, I mean, they made a point and it was a loud point and a lot of people joined and millions of Canadians supported that and mandates were lifted. Did that not do the job? Is that not good enough?
The truckers did a fantastic job, and I would never say that their job was not good enough. I would say that because there's been such a hard censorship in our media, and because Canadians are still passive towards the socialism, that it's not good enough yet. And we're going to see in the coming months, as James has said, as more of the facts come out and these things are litigated in court, I hope that Canadians will continue to wake up in the right way. How do we deal with woke versus awake type of analogies? So I hope people become less woke and more awake. And that's a possibility with folks like us speaking out and really trying to help people understand the situation.
Okay, and if people want more information on your organization, where can they go, Michael?
libertycoalitioncanada.com. They have all of our legal updates on the cases that James is taking. We have a number of different podcasts that they can subscribe to there and stay connected through email by subscribing on our website. So
hey,
thanks
gentlemen,
for asking,
thank you.
Tanya.
Thank you so much for joining me today. Appreciate it. For Counterpoint, I'm Tanya Granick Allen.